We are the Gujarat Technological University. Since its inception over a decade ago, GTU has been empowering young and curating minds to realize their true potential. Over 4 lakh inspired students are enrolled with one of the premier academic universities in India. With more than 450 affiliated colleges in its fold operating across 5 zones of the state, GTU, the International Innovative University, your place to move forward.
Hello and welcome to the class of research methodology. I am Dr. Richa Pandit and today I am going to talk about a causal research design. Causal research design is conducted to identify the cause and effect relationship between the variables. In this research, researchers try to study the answer why change in one variable takes place because of the another variable. Before we understand the causal research design in detail, these are the 3 basic differences in exploratory, descriptive and conclusive or a causal research design. Exploratory research is basically try to understand the problem, identify the new variable and to understand the problem and the situation. Basically, a new phenomenon is explored with the use of the exploratory research design, and that is why this research is unstructured in nature, and the result of this research is inconclusive. Descriptive research design define the characteristics of market or the business. It is very structured in nature. The method of the data collection is survey and observation, and the research result give a conclusive findings. Conclusive research design is basically designed to understand cause and effect relationship between the variable. Again, this is structured research design and result is conclusive in nature. Now, what is experiment? It is nothing but a systematic study wherein researcher control or manipulate the independent variable. Before we understand this systematic study, we need to understand what is dependent variable and independent variable. Independent variable more or less are studied as a demographic variable of the respondents that includes age, gender, occupation, income, education, etc. This is controlled or manipulated by researcher, which means I want to study the impact of age on the social media usage. For me, age can be defined as a teenager, youngsters, adult, and a senior citizen. For some other researcher, it may be a number. So that researcher categorize the age in terms of numbers like 18 to 28, 28 to 38, 38 to 48, so on and so forth. So this independent variable are manipulated, rather I will use the word understand by the researcher as per the subject of the research. On the other hand, dependent variable are those variables wherein the researcher has little or no control, like a customer satisfaction, customer retention, a perceived loneliness of an individual. And that is why researcher is very keen to note the change that takes place in dependent variable in the context of independent variable. Causality. What is the concept of the causality? It is a pre-requirement of the experimentation. Causality understands the phenomenon between the variable x occurred because of the y. There are 4 conditions that explain causality in detail. First, covariation, which means cause and effect in identified dependent and the independent variable occurs together. Sales of the product increase as soon as the discount been offered. Second, time order of occurrence. As the definition says, time order of occurrence, which means a change that takes place in independent variable subsequently cause a change in the dependent variable. For example, a discount offered on a product on the first day of the promotion scheme may ultimately lead to the increased sales of the product for the remaining period of time. Third, systematic elimination of the causal variable which which helps the researcher to focus on a one particular variable that explains the change in the dependent variable, like age. Again, teenager or a senior citizen or a super senior citizen. Only a one particular category is taken into the consideration to study the specific dependent variable. And experimental design last. It is nothing but the set of the procedure which lead to the structured method to understand the causality between the variables. Now, it is very important to understand the internal and external validity in the experimentation. What is internal and external validity? Internal validity is defined as how confidently a researcher can conclude that the variation independent variable is caused by the independent variable, and this study is said to have the higher internal validity, which means to what extent your research can generalize the causality. Higher the chances of generalization of the study, higher the study is said to have the internal validity. On the other hand, the study with a low internal validity only explain the plausible interpretation of the cause and effect relationship between the variable. So external validity typically refer as a generalization of the result of the study. Now, the problem in external validity is basically related to a specific but a time limited, and the set of experimental condition may not deal with the interpretation of untested variable in the real world, which means if the study does not have the external validity, researcher cannot replicate the same study in a different set of subject at a different set of span. It is very important for the research to have the generalized result of the experiment and a said external validity. Now, laboratory versus field experiment. What is laboratory experiment? This kind of the research is conducted in an artificial setting with a very controlled environment. A focus group discussion that takes place in a room in a glass chamber with a close monitoring with the use of CCTV having a mic inserted in it. This is an example of a laboratory experiment wherein the test unit is quite cautious and controlled in nature to give response to the set of the experiment. Second, field experiment. It takes place in a natural setting. A researcher asks the customer about the experience in the mall while he or she is doing the shopping or visiting the mall. That is said to have the field experiment. Field experiment benefit the researcher to observe the variables, to observe the behavior in a natural setting. Experimental design and the classification. There are basically two different types of the experimental design: classical experimentation design and statistical experimentation design. Now, what is experimentation design? It is basically a blueprint on which researcher execute the entire experimentation, or a researcher execute the entire research process. To understand the causality, to understand the relationship between a variable, one dependent variable and one independent variable. So I'm stopping here. I'll again meet all of you in the next session, wherein I'll discuss all the different types of the classical experimental design. Thank you very much.